Is a slight increase in the level of CO2 in the atmosphere good or bad for life on Earth?
Well, it's definitely good for life on Earth. We know that very well from the geological record. The current geological period has extremely low CO2 levels. Only once in the past has it been this low. And over most of the history of the Earth, CO2 levels have been much higher. Plants are adapted to much higher levels than CO2. You can see the whole Earth greening now, largely due to CO2. It's been a major contributor to the increase in crop yields. There have been other factors too, fertilizer, better varieties, but CO2 has been quite substantial. So there's nothing bad about it.
But there's a lot of people who do think there's something bad about it, of course. So I take it you do not buy into man-made climate change, no?
Well, of course, there's a little bit of man-made climate change. For example, every time you build a city, it gets a little bit warmer because you cut down all the trees and you get rid of the meadows and things that previously cooled that area. So if you look all around the world, cities are typically several degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside. And the bigger they are, the warmer they get. So that's, man-made warming, but it doesn't have anything to do with CO2. It has to do with suppression of cooling from transpiration of water for the most part. There are other factors too. It affects, convective cooling, the wind and stuff like that, but it's mostly less water evaporating. So of course
So
there
how,
are man-made
well,
effects on climate on local levels. Now, CO2 itself is a greenhouse gas, and so it does cause some warming. And I personally think that the increase since pre-industrial times from maybe 280 parts per million to a little over 400 today has caused a small amount of warming. I think most of the warming we've seen, and there has been warming, that's clear from many pieces of evidence. I think most of that has been a natural recovery from the little ice age. It really got cold in 1500, 1600, 1700, and we're only now beginning to pull out of that.
I take it that's a good thing. But you must have received a fair amount of criticism for going against the status quo. How much criticism have you received?
Well, of course, I expected to get criticism because this is something that is a religion for many people, and you don't criticize a person's religion, whether, no matter what denomination they are, whether they're Christian or Muslim or Hindu, that's kind of a sacred thing. And so, unfortunately, this is a religion disguised as science. And so, if you criticize it, you have to expect blowback, in many cases, quite vicious. I get occasional death threats from people whose religion has been sullied by my comments.
So would it be fair to call climate change a little bit of a, a religious idol and something that people are willing to get on board with without actually doing the research because it's a beliefs rather than it is based on fact?
Well, yeah, there are many reasons that people have signed up to the climate establishment message. There are many honest, good people who've been misled. Since childhood. All they've heard is that, evil carbon dioxide is poisoning the planet. No one ever told them then when they were children that they're breathing out 4% carbon dioxide with every breath. It's anything but a poison. It's absolutely essential for life. So I feel a little bad about these people. The establishment has brainwashed them. Then there are others, my colleagues, for example, in science and academia. This has turned out to be a boatload of money. It's wonderful funding for your laboratory. It gives you all sorts of muscle in your university because you're bringing in all of these grants with all the overhead that goes with it, and making the university look good. After all, you're saving the planet. And so these people, usually are sophisticated to know that at the very least this is grossly exaggerated, and but they're not willing to say that, because the benefits are so great. And then,
Indeed.
there are the politicians who've latched onto this as a good way to gain power, of all human sins, probably the worst of all is the lust for power. I prefer people who lust for money or lust for, sex or something like that. It's less damaging than the lust for power. And so CO2, climate change has been a tool for those people also. So
Yeah.
on the whole, it's been a pretty bad episode of human history, but we've had similar ones before. The last time there was something like this in my country was the Prohibition era, when we banned alcohol, and people said at the time, well, this may not work, it might encourage organized crime, it might be hard to enforce. Of course, they didn't get the half of it. It was much worse than anyone predicted, and we even passed the constitutional amendment. Nobody had the courage to stand up and say this is a mistake, but it was a terrible mistake. And we have a drug problem today, part of which traces back to prohibition. That's when these crime families got their start. So
And
every
of
now and
course,
then, humanity does just completely crazy things, and we're doing it again with climate.
again, the powers that be, especially the authorities, must have got a lot of money to tackle prohibition, and I believe that's part of the reason as well why they focused in on marijuana laws as well at the time. They banned
Yeah,
marijuana around the same time because they knew they were going to get lots of money because prohibition was a way
yeah,
to fund these sort
yeah,
of
that's
things.
right. That's
So
right.
so it,
Human
go
history
on.
is loaded with hypocrisy.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Is I've done a lot of research on the grassroots of the climate change agenda, and is the modern climate change agenda a scam manufactured by the likes of Maurice Strong and the Club of Rome in the late 60s and 70s? Is that what we're dealing with still? The remnants of this very clever way to enact power and to take power by introducing something that was hard to prove or disprove.
Yes, I think you've described it correctly. Many people who are the foot soldiers don't realize that, but I think this was manufactured with a fair amount of thought and cleverness. You have to hand it to them. Here's this crazy meme, this crazy narrative that this essential element of life that we breathe in and out, is a poison. How can you get away with that? I mean, it's amazing. But you can look back in history. For example, we in my country had the Salem witch trials in 1690. And it wasn't pushed by the common people. The common people weren't even sure there were witches to begin with. It was pushed by Harvard, graduates, theology graduates. They were the judges at the trial. And, one of them, Cotton Mather, was even selling a book on how to detect witches. It was selling very well at that time. And so and nobody had the courage to say there's no such thing as witches. A few people tried and they were simply hung. And so it was finally stopped because of judicial niceties that, the main evidence was spectral evidence that some, charming little girl would dream, that her neighbor was consorting with Satan and testify in court. And, who's going to disbelieve the dream of a, innocent little girl, right? Like Greta.
What are you looking forward to the most? Are you looking forward to the Great Taking or the Great Reset? The dog is like, the Great Reset! Yeah! So, Cory, who did you support in the last American election? Was it Benjamin Netanyahu or Benjamin Netanyahu?
It was Benjamin Netanyahu, of course.
How many vaccines do you think they'll have to force upon you before they get you to be an OnlyFans model?
All of them,
Oh.
or the best new emergency use authorized mRNA one they can come up with.
Before the show, I was told that the Pope is actually hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and DB Cooper on their Terra Mar mothership. So, of course, we're going to have Joel Allen go up first. Let's play. What about this? Do you know what you get, Dana, if you cross the head of Scientology with divorce papers?
Oh no, I have no idea.
Buried in the basement of Scientology headquarters.
Damn, that's dark.
Yeah, I know. Super
And
dark.
accurate.
Brutal.
And accurate. Yeah, those are the best jokes. Dark and accurate are the best jokes. John, how long before we have robot cockfighting?
I don't know.
Will you give your cock to robots willingly?
No, I will not.
Will you be joining my new sex cult? It's called the Acolytes of Moldbug, and we spend all of our times playing Dungeons and Dragons while moaning about people who used to bully us in high school.
I will be washing myself with soap made from my enemy.
Who do you think would do a better job of covering up their wife's murder, RFK Jr. or King Charles III? Just
I don't know. I mean,
hypothetical.
RFK Jr. is a lot more, charismatic, so he probably would do a better job.
Hey, now that's what I want to see. Oh my God, that guy is cute. Look at, oh my God. What did they find in Benjamin Franklin's fireplace in London?
Oh, I know this.
Oh,
Was it a little lipstick that didn't melt in the fire?
No,
Yeah,
it was
what? You gotta say truth bomb if you got it.
the truth bomb. I think it was the remains of children.
Whoa, look, he's done it. Yes. So, Corey, if you had to choose, had with capital letters, had to choose, you've got no option between Adolf Hitler and J. Edgar Hoover. Which one would you fillet? Like, I don't know. Go on. You got to choose one. If you scrapped the entire US education system and replaced it with potatoes that have faces drawn on them, do you think the youth of America would get a better education?
I don't know. We'll ask AI what AI thinks.
Yeah, AI would come back with pictures of drawings of potatoes with faces on, I think. If you had two big red buttons in front of you, both with exploding skulls on them, which one would you press? The one that's labeled RFK Jr. or the other one that's labeled RFK Jr.?
You know, I'm a lover, not a fighter. I don't believe in killing people, so I'd let them live.
Dick, you're well known for baby lotion parties with the elite, aren't you?
That's my thing. Yeah, you've checked up on me quite well, haven't you?
P. Dicky, that's what they call you around the place. I've heard this. I've heard this. If you had to choose between Africans and Asians, which one do you think you drop?
For what? A little context here.
Well, did L. Ron Hubbard really live in a cupboard?
No.
Yeah, that is the right answer. It was actually a closet. So there you go. He was in the closet the whole time. Excellent. What's going to be your preferred weapon when the Americans and Canadians go to war? Will you go the English-speaking Canadian way and become a mounted rifleman, or will you go with the French-speaking Canadian way and become a mounted dildo-man?
Always like to talk Kennedy. Kennedy is my entire life. I think that it is the most important event in American history, possibly world history, because of the results that we've seen from it. And so, yeah, I haven't had any problems dedicating my entire life to this course of study.
That's awesome. And I made that clear as well in the monologue that this is one of the most important events. It changed the dynamics of an entire world. You know, whenever I look back, you know, lots of people say, oh, well, one of the biggest events in the past 70 years was 9/11 or something else. It's like, yeah, all of those events only happened because of Kennedy, of what happened
Correct.
to Kennedy that day. So let's start off. Really simple. Are you going to solve our game of Cluedo and tell us it was Lee Harvey Oswald in the book depository with a dodgy rifle?
No, as a matter of fact, I would like to correct the record on that and state with certainty that Oswald never worked at the book depository. He probably never stepped foot in that building, and he most certainly was not there on November 22nd, 1963. Most people don't seem to really be able to grasp how I can say that, because we seem to have stories of Oswald being dropped off in the morning by Buell Frazier. We have people interacting with Oswald throughout the day. We have allegedly Robert McNeil and Pierce Allman, who saw him as he left the book depository. So we have all of these stories about a man named Lee Harvey Oswald who allegedly worked at the book depository. But when you really get down to brass tacks, what it turns out is that Oswald didn't work there, and that he was being impersonated in the book depository by a man named William Seymour. And that name, William Seymour, should be very familiar to Kennedy researchers, because he was involved with the anti-Castro operations going on down at No Name Key, going back all the way to late 1960, early 61. So by the time of the assassination, you've got multiple years of multiple people impersonating Lee Harvey Oswald, creating this legend of Oswald. That none of it's true. None of it's true. Oswald never went to Mexico City. Oswald never worked at the book depository. Oswald never did any of the things that people attribute to Lee Harvey Oswald. And the evidence for all of this presents itself in glorious fashion on November 22nd, when William Seymour is clearly stopped inside the building numerous times. He's seen fleeing from the depository. And best of all, he's captured in the Robert Hughes film. So yes, to really get down to understand that, you really got to read my book, A Warning from History, because it goes into hundreds of pages on the setup of Oswald in the years leading up to November 22nd.
So how did you get into researching the JFK assassination then? What was it that led you into that? Because you said you made it your whole life. I mean, you don't make something your whole life without having like a starting point. What made you so enthralled in it?
Well, it was I've been intrigued by it since 91, when the JFK film came out, which is funny because that ended up turning out to be an Israeli propaganda film. But at the end of the day, it was 2018. I had just spent about 3 years on World War II and the Holocaust, which I've recently returned to, actually. And after kind of wrapping up that phase of research, I kind of understood how to begin to do real research at that point. And I was like, well, now's the time. I need to know what happened to Kennedy. And so basically, I spent 3.5 years, 12-hour days in my bedroom. I didn't leave to do anything other than study Kennedy. And so at this point today, I've read upwards of 140,000 pages of documents. And documents are a big part of my show. I do a daily podcast on Kennedy where basically I read the documents to people and kind of analyze them. So, but I just needed to know. And at that point, I'd kind of figured out how to be a historian. And so I just needed to apply those skills to it.
So how did you start when you were telling this story to other people? When you started writing the book, how did you start telling the story? Where did you decide to start?
Gosh, I think I started with the mafia, because it was obvious the mob was involved. But when you really come to understand the mafia is not who you think they are. The mafia is not controlled by who you think controls them. And so when you really come to understand the mafia, you really come to understand that in 1963, you have this partnership of sorts between the CIA, the American mafia, and the Israeli Mossad. And they're one organization in 1963. They're inseparable. And you can go back and you can kind of trace the origins of these relationships, particularly with Israel and the US mafia, back to ultimately Ben-Gurion and Meyer Lansky, who partnered up directly to pull off the Sonborn Institute, which lasted, I'm sure you're familiar with Sonborn, the pilfering of our military surplus post-World War II, which everyone thought was being sent to the anti-Castro Cubans. But let me give you a plot twist. None of those weapons or none of the money ever raised for the anti-Castro Cubans ever made it to them. They were all deflected through a company in Virginia called Inter-Armco, which was a CIA front that basically provided weapons, money, and arms to the Israelis to fight the Palestinians. So When you go back to and you really analyze the Kennedy assassination and you look at what's going on in Israel and Palestine today, there is a direct link here, a direct connection. It's not even like 10 steps removed. If Kennedy had lived, what was going on in Palestine and Israel would not be happening today. So that is an angle of the Kennedy assassination that no one ever really thinks of or considers. But when you really start to get into like the weapons smuggling that was connected to Sonborn and all of the various bunkers that were broken into when all of our World War II surplus was stolen, particularly by guys involved in Kennedy like David Ferry, Sergio Arcacha, Gordon Novell, Leighton Martins, all these guys were directly involved in that stuff. And that is the direct link to Israel. Not only that, you start to dig really deep into New Orleans and you get into the relationships between David Ferry, Clay Shaw, other more unknown CIA guys like Martin McAuliffe or Kent Courtney. There was an entire propaganda infrastructure in New Orleans connected to Latin America and South America with guys like William Gaudet. But these guys also doubled in kind of managing the Cubans that were in New Orleans. And when you really start to dig deep into this stuff, what you'll find is that the motivations for helping them had nothing to do with really Castro in general, right? Most of the Cuban operations were cover fronts for the raising of money and arms for Israel, which is crazy because you don't really ever hear of anyone else talking about that. And so to me, the relationships between what's going on in the Middle East and Kennedy being killed they're inseparable.
Yeah, that's an amazing, because I from my research, I mean, still today, I think that's the forming of the big gray intelligence blob that we see today. So why was Lee Harvey Oswald chosen to be the patsy, and how do we know he didn't fire the kill shot? I mean, you said it wasn't even him, but I mean, there's a lot of people who would say, "Oh, I dispute that," or etc. So what would you say to that?
Right. So first off, in regards to Oswald and his ability to even fire a rifle, when you go back and you look into the origins of the rifle and also the revolver that he allegedly ordered, you'll find that the money order that was used to order the rifle was a fake. Money orders in 1963 were done on hard card stock, but when you look into the photocopies of the money order that were allegedly used, it was obviously made on paper. This ink bleed through to the back. So unless Oswald was going around using forged money orders, it was a planting of evidence after the fact by the FBI. And actually, I've been able to trace the planting of the evidence back to a single lawyer who worked for the FBI who came up with the vast majority of the stuff that they don't have originals for anymore, which is exactly the case. And the same thing with the revolver that Oswald allegedly ordered. It's not even the same revolver that showed up. He ordered one revolver, a generic, and a Smith & Wesson that cost $10 more showed up in its place. And it was rejected from the post office and ended up at a place called Seaport Traders, where a man named Paxton picked up the handgun and signed for it. So when you dig into the fine details of Oswald, the rifle, anything connecting him to anything, you'll find that all of the things we've been told, all of the fine detail points are fabricated. They were made up after the fact. Oswald is undoubtedly a patsy, and the question is, why was he set up? Well, he was undoubtedly involved in one of two CIA programs. Originally going back to 1955, there was a program called Operation Redskin, and it was the blanket program to get people into the Soviet Union. Ultimately, it was reorganized by 1959 under a program called AE Balcony, which came to an end June 1st of 1962. When did Oswald leave the Soviet Union? The first week of June, 1962. Oswald, I'm pretty sure, was part of this AE Balcony program, which basically was designed to get a spy into the Soviet Union using legal means, whether through education, school visas, regular travel, anything like that. However, when he was there, Oswald made the mistake of bringing back a Russian spy in Marina Oswald. And I believe he was ultimately chosen for this, number one, because of his communist bona fides that they had already established for him. It would be easy to pass off. But I believe he pissed off a bunch of people when he brought back a Russian spy with him. And so I think that was kind of like the final decision-making on why he was the one chosen. It's really strange, though, when you look at like the dates of when things were done, like when did they order the rifle? When did they order the handgun, which was proof of like the setup began earlier than March of 63. And from what I can tell, the green light to go ahead and do this operation involving Oswald and most of the nitty-gritty details was formed sometime between January and February of 1963 at the winter meeting of the company Permindex, which was basically a front company, a Mossad front company founded by George Mandel, And it was ultimately a conduit of global intelligence. It had members of the United States Mafia, the CIA, Corsican Mafia. I mean, you had ex-Nazis like Hallmar Schacht. You had all kinds of people involved in Permindex. Permindex had a sub-company called Centro Mondiale Commercial, which was based technically in Italy, but it was ran out of Montreal by a guy named Louis Bloomfield. Louis Bloomfield, direct connection to Clay Shaw and David Ben Gurion. And Louis Bloomfield really is the ultimate like center of the wheel, connecting everybody in this assassination. But the direct connections are to New Orleans and Clay Shaw, Sergio Arcacha, David Ferry, and a guy named Kerry Thornley, who I've documented flying up numerous times to Montreal under aliases to meet with Louis Bloomfield, going back, to March and April of 1963. So we have all of our main players down in New Orleans who are actively involved with CIA, actively involved with Mafia, actively involved with go-betweens to the Mossad through corporations like the Schlumberger Corporation, which was run by a guy named Jean de Menil, who was also on the board of Permindex. So yeah, when you get into the why of Oswald, I think it was mostly convenience, but also when you get into deep Oswald research, you'll find that there were two Oswalds during his growing up. We have duplicate school records of him at the same time in two different places, mainly Fort Worth and New Orleans. So we have we've got about 4 or 5 years of duplicate school records and evidence that's showing that there were actually two children being raised as Lee Harvey Oswald all the way up until the time that Oswald joins the Marines, which is a whole nother twist, which was mostly covered by a guy named John Armstrong.
Wow, that is an amazing sort of revelation. It's something that I've always wondered. These multiple Osborns, Oswalds, you go back in time and try and work out what happened, and they don't go back very far. And you wonder. I always wondered where that would lead if you kept going. That makes a lot of sense. So, right, you're mentioning like amazing researchers there, of course, as well. Who, I mean, a lot of us researchers, when we're doing investigative pieces, a lot of our research is where we find stuff because we're working off the backs of giants. And you're pretty brave to be entering into such a contentious event, which has been covered by every angle by so many different commentators and researchers. Have you had much pushback, or have you had praise from other JFK researchers so far?
No, Kennedy researchers hate me. They don't even acknowledge my work exists. And every once in a while, they'll cherry pick parts of it and then try to claim it's their own. It's really kind of funny because it's all in my book. I beat everyone to the punch. I identified the 3 tramps. I mean, I solved the Tippit shooting. Tippit was shot by 2 men, Kerry Thornley and David Ferry. There's no angle of this assassination that I haven't worked out the nitty-gritty on. And really, when you come to understand what they were doing, they were basically setting Oswald up and preparing for this assassination long before the assassination was even decided on. And I believe originally what they were doing was they were trying to continue to establish these communist bona fides to get Oswald into Cuba. But I believe somewhere around February or March of 63, that idea went out the window and he was repurposed for this assassination when it finally went into place. Because you can go back and you can look at them giving the name Oswald in various places as far back as like Bolton Ford in January of 1961, where Kerry Thornley and a guy named Lawrence Howard went into the Bolton Ford dealership, tried to get a bunch of Jeeps for the Friends of Democratic Cuba, which was being run out of Guy Bannister's office. But at this time, Oswald's still in the Soviet Union, provably. So somebody gave the name Lee Oswald to try to buy a bunch of trucks in January of 61. Why would they do that? They weren't planning on killing Kennedy in January of 61. It had to be to continue to establish communist bona fides to repurpose him to go to Cuba. When you look into the Mexico City incident, really, it turns out that he never even went to Mexico City, and he was being set up there by a guy named Kerry Thornley. And Kerry Thornley, when you dig into his background, it turns out he was in the Marines with Oswald. He knew Oswald. He had some of his handlers after the fact were people who were in Oswald's Marine Air Squadron Group Number 1 at Atsugi that he was later sent to after Oswald had left Atsugi. So you see a recycling of handlers for people who were originally handling Oswald, who then handled Kerry Thornley, and then Kerry Thornley went to go set up Oswald. So it becomes obvious that some of Oswald's initial handlers were in on his setup, double crossing him from the beginning. So
yeah, Lord Melbury Lord Melbury in the chat said, just to go back a little bit, said, wasn't Judith Ferry Baker and I don't know if I pronounced that right, the girlfriend of Oswald?
She's a liar. I don't believe a damn word she says. She's contradicted herself more times than I can count. And she claims to have made a phone call to Oswald at the book depository. And I can prove Oswald never stepped foot in that book depository. So she's a liar. Everything she's ever said should be discounted.
Mm-hmm. So why was JFK, why did he have to be murdered? Why so publicly?
Ultimately, he was going to shut down the Israelis. He was going to pull all funding from the Israelis because of their refusal to allow inspectors into the Dimona nuclear reactor, which they're not even supposed to have, right? So ultimately, he was going to make sure that Israel as a country ended. He was not a fan of Israel from the beginning. He'd never been able to have any diplomatic ties with them because they continue, as Kennedy said, all they ever do is lie. And not much has changed after 60 years. So he was ultimately going to shut them down as a country over Dimona, meaning pull funding. And once we pulled funding from them, they can't survive on their own. They're a parasite nation, and they would have been destroyed by the Arab nations, within months of us pulling funding. Period. So that's why they killed them.
Yeah.
Okay, it becomes really easy to prove when you get into the relationships of Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Rabin and Yitzhak Shamir, who were all in Dallas on November 22nd.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The players who were involved and who were in Dallas, that's really interesting. There's a couple of questions from the chat. I'm looking over at the chat. I see the first question I want to ask is from Mally Bites, who says, did the passenger in the front seat finish off JFK with his pistol?
No, that's from just a bad lighting in the Zapruder film. Although the driver, William Greer, 100% in on the assassination. Also, everyone in the Secret Service car, 100% in on the assassination. The Secret Service car, when it pulls into Dealey Plaza, has 10 men on it. 2 of them get off, Dave Powers and Clint Hill, meaning there should only be 8 men on the car. However, by the time the Secret Service car gets past the triple underpass, they're back to having 10 men on the car. They mysteriously picked up 2 passengers along the way. And that's clearly evident in McIntyre photo number 2, if you want to go and take a look for yourself.
Oh, that's a really nice, concise answer there. And Dark Commission asked a question. Now, he's asked, after all this time, with at least most of the people dead and gone, at least most of the people, what's the point of further research? I actually had a question that said, is there anyone still alive today who was directly involved in the assassination? So maybe you can answer the two together.
Sure. Yes. Number one, this is the most important event in American history because it's the day America died. America came to an end on November 22nd, 1963, and we've been in a vassal state, a colony, if you would, of the nation of Israel.
Okay,
Period.
that's a pretty serious answer.
Well, look at what's going on today. They're murdering Palestinians in scores, and we just keep giving them weapons. Why? Because on November 22nd, Israel killed our president and took over our country. They implanted crypto Jew Lyndon Johnson as president, and he handed them the keys to the kingdom. Evidence for this can be substantiated through the Liberty and the dozen other events involving Egypt and Middle East, which we could probably go into on another show. But the evidence for the fact that Israel killed Kennedy and took over our country and we continue to exist as a vassal state is, to me, the evidence is more and more every day when we continue to fund these lunatics.
And Johnny Dollar in the chat also has a question. He said, is the theory that JFK's body was switched in flight to DC true?
I'll give you this much. There's something to that. I don't know what. Look into a guy named John Liggett, who was a mob funeral reconstructionist. There's a lot of smoke around this, but I have not taken the time to really dig into the minute details. There's a lot of things that I know there's a lot of smoke, but I haven't gotten to the fire yet, and that's one of them. I can tell you with certainty the photographs of Kennedy's head in the autopsy are fakes. If you look into what is called the Harper fragment is a piece of occipital bone that was picked up in Dealey Plaza belonging to Kennedy. It's proof that this section of his head was blown out, but none of the autopsy photos show that. So a lot of people think that like J.D. Tippett was a body double swap thing. I think that's a garbage misinformation. But at some point, they did do some manipulation with Kennedy's autopsy photos because none of them are correct or accurate to what really happened.
Okay, so the money shot, we could call this. What does your research show, or who does your research show fired the shots, in your opinion?
Yep. Well, there were 2 shooters on the grassy knoll. The first shot came from David Ferry, who struck Kennedy in the throat. And the final shot came from none other than Lyndon Johnson's right-hand man, or vice versa, depending on how you look at it, Jack Valente, who Jack Valente was a longtime spook working for CIA. I have documents proving he worked for the CIA. He lied about where he was during the motorcade. He lied about where he was after the motorcade. And even his alibi witnesses, I've been able to debunk all those statements in chapter 6 of my book. So when you go into the Jack Valente section of my book, the whole thing is dedicated to debunking every single bit of alibi he provided for where he was when Kennedy was shot.
Yeah, he seems like an extremely important character as well in U.S. history that has been sidelined, of course, for good reason. Well, good reason for the bad guys. What were the politicians' part in the assassinations then? Because we're talking here about the nitty gritty. But what were who were the ones who were really behind this at a political level?
Well, it's. When I look into like Kennedy's men, I look into the two most obvious people were Dave Powers and Kenny O'Donnell. And Kenny O'Donnell, who was, he was a Catholic Irishman. He was supposed to be like personal friends with Kennedy, had his back on a personal level. But when you get into Kenny O'Donnell's activities, Kenny O'Donnell was in the Secret Service car who picked up 2 passengers along the way and never reported that. Kenny O'Donnell was directly responsible for having the president's body taken back to Washington and not having the autopsy done in Dallas. So Kenny O'Donnell was like blocking the proper way things should have been done the whole time. And so when it gets into like bigger people, was it Lyndon Johnson know this was coming or any of that? I don't buy into any of that because Lyndon Johnson's a puppet and you don't give your puppet too much information to begin with. And if he knew the assassination was coming and was ever questioned about it, he would have information. He could lie. He would, could be caught in a lie. You can't risk that with your puppet. So anyone who thinks that Johnson had anything to do with it, I don't think so, which to me, the evidence would contradict that, right? Because Jack Valente, I'm saying, shot him and he was Johnson's right-hand man. How can you justify that? Well, it makes perfect sense if the relationship was vice versa and that Valente was actually Johnson's handler in the White House, which is what I believe. So, but yes, everyone surrounding Johnson was in on this. Everyone surrounding Kennedy was in on this. But can I say Johnson was in on it directly? Absolutely not. Like I said, the guy never won an election. He was put into positions of power by forces greater than himself, I'll say. And so, yeah, anyone who thinks that Lyndon Johnson was a mastermind of anything doesn't understand history.
Yeah, I do think Lyndon Johnson, he looked shell-shocked in all of the images and pictures of that day. He looked like he's like, oh my God, whoever did this really did this, and I kind of I'm now gotta take over, and he didn't look like he knew it was coming. So personally, that's how I feel anyway.
As soon as he got back to Air Force One, he gets back there relatively quickly. And Godfrey McHugh, who was general, he was Kennedy's advisor, military advisor. He searched Air Force One for like 15 minutes and he could not find Johnson anywhere. He eventually locates Johnson in the bathroom behind the president's office. And Johnson is crouched down in the shower and he's bawling like a baby, saying, "It's a plot. It's a plot. They're going to get us all." And then that didn't appear in the history books until 30, 40 years later, when an interview was given to a journalist, and Godfrey McHugh actually confessed that. So, yeah, I don't believe that Johnson was involved or had any knowledge the assassination was going to happen. I'm more of the belief that his Secret Service knew and he didn't.
Yeah,
guys like Lem Johns.
I want to just make a couple of notes from the chat. Little Carol said she's so over the JFK assassination. so she.
Well, that's because you don't understand it.
Oh, but
you don't understand it.
Little Carol understands more than you think. I've met her. She's a force to be reckoned with. Don't ever mess with Little Carol. I can promise you that. Joel Allen says, "Was Jack Ruby assassinated?"
No, Jack Ruby had cancer going back to the 40s. He was constantly fighting cancer his whole life, and he confessed this to multiple people. And Jim Garrison has numerous documents showing that Ruby had cancer, at least in 62, 63, before the assassination. So no.
Right. Okay. Dark Commission says Fair enough answers, thanks. And he says hi from a fellow Hughes, so he just wanted to quickly
Oh,
say
thank you.
hello from a fellow Hughes here. Right, okay. So what you were saying there, it's taken like 50 years or whatever for information to come out, but this is the same. Why is it that the truth behind the Kennedy assassination has taken over 50 years to come out? Why is this when most of the people are now dead or dying?
Well, it will uncover who really controls our country. And that is more relevant today than it's ever been in history.
Yeah.
As we continue to just funnel billions of dollars to Israel. I mean,
Yeah.
our government has really just become an Israeli exploitation device. Really, that's all it is. They're pilfering our coffers. That's it. That's what this has happened. That's the end result, is that you have Israeli and Jewish forces that are basically pilfering us as a nation and leaving us like Detroit.
Yep. Well, now you've done all of this research. So what do you make, and you mentioned it earlier, of Oliver Stone's movie JFK, and also what do you think of some of the main JFK researchers who were involved in researching that movie, like Jim DiEugenio?
Right. Jim DiEugenio is a traitor to his country. That movie was produced by Arnon Milchan, who was a confessed Mossad spy who smuggled nuclear triggers out of our country, directly connected to Kennedy, directly connected to Benjamin Netanyahu, who was an employee of his who assisted in this. So if you go through that movie, those idiots left us enough Easter eggs to know that they did this. So there's a couple scenes where people are reading newspapers in that film. Pause it and go look at what articles are in those newspapers that they're reading. That'll give you a big hint as to who was behind the assassination.
Right, that's amazing stuff. Right, do you think that they'll ever release the rest of the evidence within our lifetime?
There's no point. There's nothing in there of any value. I'll tell you exactly what's of value in the documents. The David Morales file, okay, because it'll show he was in Dallas, and it'll show his relationship with the grassy knoll shooter. Then you have files on Charles the Blade Turing, who was a mob guy and a close friend of Jack Valenti. Those are still being withheld, and those are being withheld because it'll establish the relationship there. And then you got documents on a guy named Harry Hall or Harry Haller, another mob/CIA guy who was involved with Jack Valenti in some deal for Jeeps that was using White House letterhead, and Harry Haller got busted. Most of those documents are still withheld under the JFK documents. So those are the three documents that I think are the most important. They'll establish the relationships between Jack Valenti and the CIA. And those are the documents they're never going to get. We'll never get out, but we don't need them because I'll tell you exactly what's in them. So.
I like your confidence, or cockiness, one of the two. I don't know, but no, confidence. I'm going to call it confidence. What was George H.W. Bush in Dallas that day, and do you think he played a role in the operation?
He was there, but you got to think in '63 he was a nobody. In '63, the CIA approached people who had money and oilmen and these kind of guys, rich people, to do their patriotic duty and assist the CIA. And that's exactly what George Bush was then. This is like, 15 years before he becomes the head of the CIA. So no, people put way too much emphasis on him. But here's the deal. Everybody was in Dealey Plaza that day. Everyone was in Dallas. They had to have been, because it was a sort of ritual and they all had to be there. And therefore, of course, Bush was there. I mean, what did he say? He said he was at a Kiwanis Club meeting in East Texas, and then he had some other excuses. But no, he was in Dallas. But the fact that he was in Dallas to me is not overly telling because they were all there, all of them. I mean, like all of them. I'm pretty convinced Angleton, Morales, the whole JM Wave station, which included Ted Shackley and George Joanitas, like all of these guys had to be there. That's why Dealey Plaza was a controlled scene. Like when you look at how Dealey Plaza filled up, it was controlled from the jump. They only let certain people in there. Roads were blocked off by the cops. I mean.
Okay, one last question before we go out. You've probably got about 40 seconds to answer this one. So what about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? He's running for president with or without brainworms, but he also seems to be down with both the deep state and the Zionists. Can that still be considered as a consequence of the assassination of his uncle?
I can't figure that guy out. When we first were introduced to him in the modern era and what he was doing and how it seemed like a good thing. It seemed like, wow, do we really have a Kennedy coming to fix things? But then, God, his interactions with Rabbi Shmuley and all that stuff just like went to show that he has controlled opposition at its finest. I mean, there's no way in hell that I can see him as being anything positive. I mean, he's not so stupid that he doesn't know Israel killed his uncle and his father.
Yeah, indeed. Cory Hughes, you are, like I say, a powerhouse. Thank you so much for coming on the Johnny Vedmore Show. I really appreciate it, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
As a guy that is not Coke Monkey McGregor and actually looks down on that drug in particular for numerous reasons, but why not just throw it out there? My father was a kind of a low-level Coke dealer who eventually, when I was 12 years old, got convicted, got 3 to 5 in a federal penitentiary, did about one of those years, Johnny, and then he got out on work release. Had actually improved his life tremendously, went back to college, became a graphic designer before computers were around, that we're talking about mid-90s at this point. Dropped dead within 3 months of a diagnosis. I think that probably got in the prison system and was dead at 36, 36 years old. So now I've almost lived, in fact, next month, I'll have lived a decade more than my dad. And I attribute a lot of that to not going down the cocaine rabbit hole.
As we understand the Epstein case, we believe it to be a Mossad operation, that he was an agent of Mossad. He was compromising powerful American, British politicians, industrialists, in order for them to do what they wanted for Mossad intelligence. But Pottinger wasn't Mossad. Was he American based? And how does that relationship work?
Yeah, Jeffrey Epstein had links with Mossad because he was obviously, and this has to be said, right? This is from my research and this is my opinion, but it's not the most popular opinion when you actually get into the researchers, because a lot of people are pushing out the Mossad line, and I don't believe it. The evidence always leads back to the CIA, and he seems to be running the East Coast for the CIA. So Mossad people, so Mossad people who want to do anything on the East Coast have got to go to Epstein and get permission from the king to do that on their territory.
So he was the gatekeeper for Mossad on the East Coast of America?
Not only for Mossad, he's a gatekeeper for nearly all CIA intelligence operations.
Right, okay.
So the fact is, people are trying to give this image that he's just running sexual compromise operations. He's meeting with really extremely high-level operatives who are obviously now, if you
neocon CIA operatives.
Yeah, CIA operatives hide under all guises and all ideologies, and the CIA is recruiting more and more. The growth of intelligence infrastructure is just going up exponentially. Everybody says, oh, he was just this or just that, but so many this, that, what, financier, he's a real estate, he's into this, he's a scientist, he's everything. He's doing everything all the time. It does not make sense. No, he's involved in everything because he's the guy who gets everybody to do their bits. He's the guy who organizes, he's the guy who coordinates, he's the guy who links, he's the guy who says, yeah, I'll find out if you can do that for my guys who are the Central Intelligence Agency. And if people label him as mainly Mossad, or he was only working for Mossad, what difference does that make? It stops people straight away from holding the CIA accountable.
But is that where Operation Condor can be applied to that situation?
Exactly, yeah. So there's two intelligence networks running, and every time that you want to spy domestically or carry out intelligence operations domestically on either one of these countries, say probably you could say about the Five Eyes and Israel, they basically help each other out. They've become the same. They've become tentacles of the same octopus.
So MI6 would spy on USA, and MI6 would then give that information to CIA.
You wouldn't even have to do much of that. You just have like CIA spying on American soil, which is the main problem. Well, British spying on Britain, and then blaming the Americans for blaming the thing.
Just blame,
you just have to say, oh look, that person who did that had links to Mossad, so it means it was Israel who was doing it, wasn't it? Because it's links to Mossad.
So this Pottinger character seems to stride over things like Operation Condor and all of these kind of CIA operations.
He's developing them. I think they saw in Operation Condor a brilliant way to avoid accountability in the future. The reason why George H.W. Bush was so desperate to learn more about Operation Condor was that they would be able to use that. And what happens just after that period? 1976, Pottinger sorts out this with Eugene Proper and George H.W. Bush in a meeting in CIA Central. 1977, Carter gets in. Pottinger is a Republican. He's been in two Republican administrations. He's been in Nixon and Ford. Carter gets in. He's allowed to stay in to finish covering up Watergate because, of course, that's exactly what you'd allow Pottinger to stay on for. So he stays on for a special advisor through part of 1977. Goes off, then works for some amazing cases, including one against the king of blackmail, Occidental Petroleum's Arm & Hammer. The king of the blackmailers gets taken on and destroyed by Pottinger. And there's this story about how Arm & Hammer's that's brought up apparently in court, where Arm & Hammer's on his knees with 2 KGB agents in a hotel in Russia, and someone walks in on him, and Pottinger's telling this story to people. So there's this time where he's doing these really interesting other things. But what happens just afterwards? In 1980, he starts defending Gerald Bull with the space research stuff, which is illegal arms smuggling to South Africa while it's got apartheid regime and it's got sanctions on there. And so he's defending Gerald Bull. In the same year, he is involved with smuggling weapons to Iran. Pottinger himself arranges with one of his clients of his law firm and business partner, because he had $100,000 in this guy's bank, Cyrus Hashemi. Cyrus Hashemi and his brother Jamshid Hashemi had a really terrible reputation for being extremely naughty boys. And Pottinger basically and Cyrus Hashemi offered themselves to the CIA, to the American infrastructure, to get the release of the hostages in Iran during the Iranian embassy siege, but at the same time use it to mold the October surprise, which would see Ronald Reagan and Pottinger's mate George H.W. Bush take office and supply arms to Iran with deals in the background. Or if you do this and hold those hostages.
Is that all the key events in modern history, isn't it?
And that event cannot be understated, how central he is to Iran-Contra and how important that is to see, because that's Pottinger when he just balls out CIA running guns. And who else is involved in that? Who starts funding it right at the beginning? It's in One Nation Under Blackmail. Jeffrey Epstein's there financing parts of Iran-Contra, where he's pushing on Adnan Khashoggi, who's also doing arms smuggling, who's in business with Cyrus Hashemi.
Would you say that's the beginning of Epstein's relationship with Pottinger? Is that during the Iran arms Contra?
They may have met some time before. That's very likely. There's very likely that there's a lot of parties these guys are attending together. But there's 2 points. And number one, Pottinger himself later admits to Bradley Edwards, written in Relentless Pursuit, Bradley Edwards' book. He says, Pottinger admits to him that he shared an office with Jeffrey Epstein in the early 80s. And this is during the period when he's running guns in the same program as Jeffrey Epstein for the CIA. Jeffrey Epstein for the CIA. Stanley Pottinger for the CIA. Cyrus Hashemi and Adnan Khashoggi both it doesn't end well for them. After 6-7 years, I think it was 1986 where Cyrus Hashemi dies of a very fast-acting leukemia, which was obviously something to do with
Russian poison.
Working with the CIA. But what's even worse for Pottinger is in 1984, all of this is exposed because the FBI was so suspicious of what was going on, and they didn't know what the CIA was doing, and they didn't know about the October surprise, and they wouldn't have agreed with the October surprise because, of course, it's one side. It's about the Republicans gaining office. By 1984, the FBI revealed that they wiretapped Cyrus Hashemi's office and been listening to all Pottinger's conversations with him and were considering indicting him.
Indicting Pottinger?
Yeah, and Rudy Giuliani comes along and says, "Oh well, we're looking at him, and we'll
as the New York mayor."
No, but when he was I
DA.
He was an attorney. Yeah, he was, or he was an. I don't know if he was.
He was a district attorney in New York because he brought down the mafia.
Basically, basically, he moves off to Mexico really quickly. Pottinger goes, hides out, 1984, 1985. His relationship with the CIA darling Gloria Steinem ends in 1984. She runs off with industrialist Mort Zuckerman. But he had gone out with that CIA lovey since 1974 to 1984. That was 10 years where she, before she had run loads of various different CIA operations and admitted to working for the CIA, knowingly working for the CIA, and said, oh, well, it's just, we were only doing good things. And I've never seen them do anything bad. So, she was just like off in of this elite that believes the CIA were only doing good things. But they were in it for themselves, for their own financial gain. Because during this period as well, and this is what really should be questioned, because this is where the kicker is, Stanley Pottinger during this period is making the bulk of his money. He's claiming it's an investment banking. At the same time, he's smuggling guns and causing political coups of America. I mean, the October surprise caused a coup. That's a coup. That was Reagan and George H.W. Bush taking power, probably less Reagan, who was like walking around, and George H.W. Bush. So it's probably more George H.W. Bush. Just that was more the takeover of the CIA. And it leads to a question. Since JFK got shot in the head, when have the CIA not been in charge of America?
George Bush was the beginning of this entire crime spree we've seen, right through all of the presidents, maybe with the exception of Trump, but all of the others seem to be well connected through the whole Bush crime family. You can connect them all.
Yeah.
So that was the coup when the CIA took power in America. Well, this dynasty, if you like, were the ones that took over from whoever was running it before them.
Yeah, and really, it was obviously the CIA, the history of the CIA and the rise of the CIA really just coincides with the rise of the CFR and the Council on Foreign Relations, and they're obviously linked in some way. When the CFR does something, the CIA are their hand, especially through the 60s and 70s. This changes later on in certain aspects, like color revolutions. It becomes this is CIA's old jobs that they used to get in trouble for.
So the economic hitman through John Perkins' stuff.
That job got taken over by things like National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, and all these.
But that's clever the way they did that, because they didn't want the CIA to be obviously the ones that were conducting these coups in these countries, using World Bank's money to enslave them through debt. So they got corporations in front of the CIA to go in and, get them to take these enormous loans that they would give to American companies to do the work. But the reality was, behind the scenes, the CIA were pulling the strings.
Yeah,
because
CIA.
they first developed it in Iran.
There's a lot's been developed in Iran.
I think
actually
all people who
anybody.
identify as a political party are a victim, frankly.
Yeah. I was getting there logically in my brain. It was coming. Bundy's car was a Volkswagen Beetle, possibly the best car ever made.
You think so? The Volkswagen.
The Volkswagen Beetle. They were beautiful.
I want to say he had like a Volkswagen minibus, but you know what? That sounds right. I'm gonna say yes, it is. Oh,
you can
wait.
see him traveling down the road in his Volkswagen Beetle.
I'm gonna say true on that one.
Okay, it's true. It's true. He did have the best car ever made.
And people punched each other when they saw him driving by. You know that? Did they not have that in UK?
No.
There's a game we have in America called Punch Buggy. When you see a guy seeing someone drive one, you punch the first person who sees it, points at Punch Buggy, punches the other person in the car.
Oh, I wish we had had this game. I would have punched so many people. I loved games like that where I got to punch people. Oh, are you ready for a Freaky Friday session?
Man, I'm ready to go. I have my Therapy Bites trackpad with me. That's what my little mouse goes on. And I'm ready to talk about some things from Freaky Friday, which actually, right after this, we're going to do a full hour show, really digging more into what we're about to talk about, which is phantoms in the brain. So for Freaky Friday, we're talking about all the weird things that the human brain does, and the fact that we can really decatastrophize psychopathology and mental illness and ask ourselves the question, what's really going on there? And so I have a few stories for you guys today, and I look forward to digging into that about just some of the freaky things that the human brain does, and not just those with psychopathology, but we can learn what all of our brains do in the background, kind of like the wizard behind the curtain on The Wizard of Oz. So I look forward to digging into that, Johnny. I've got my tea. I'm ready to go.
I'm looking forward to it too, because some of the topics that we're gonna discuss personally affect me and personally affect other people, because everybody has been affected by these things. So I'm a talkative person. I make friends easily. I love to get to know people, warts and all. And a lot of folks can tell straight away that I'm someone they can tell their issues to, and so I often become a proverbial and literal shoulder to cry on. One of the things I've realized with experience is that people's issues are pretty nuanced and aren't always debilitating. Can you describe some of the benefits of having strange brains and mental illness?
I have a surprise for your viewers at the end of our conversation about that very thing, so thank you for bringing it up. But I'll give you just a bit of a taste test for what we're going to get to here in about, 10 or 11 minutes. So hang on, and we're going to dig into what Johnny just said, which is really this, that perhaps in your brain, viewer, we are all just Sims. We're all figments of your imagination. It's a type of psychological solipsism where really everybody else, you think they're there, but they're really not. You're just creating all of this reality in your brain, and how people really program their brains to believe just that. But let me share a few things with you. One is, and a couple of these are from books that I've read and case studies that I've had from neuropsychology, neurology, neuroscience. And one of the most interesting is the case of Dr. P, who was known as the man who mistook his wife for a hat. And he suffered from visual agnosia. So agnosia means absence of knowledge or ignorance of. And so Dr. P, he was a music teacher, and he developed a syndrome where he could not recognize faces, objects, differentiating one from the other. And strangely, he kept on mistaking his wife for a hat. His perception was so fragmented that although all of his other cognitive functions were intact, he kept trying to put his wife on his head, thinking that she was his hat. And so what we can learn from this is that all of our brains view experience as a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. And the focus of living is getting really, really good at taking this piece and fitting all the pieces together. So I would challenge viewers and listeners to understand that all of our brains have the tendency to miss things. And the key is to slow down, take a look around, realize our brains do not operate without imperfections. And moment by moment, if we take a breath, then our brains can more fully and expertly assimilate our experience so that we don't miss things.
That is amazing. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I kind of wonder then if the things we're going to discuss is just a case that people could maybe rewire their mind or retrain their mind to take the time to actually see these things. I'm not sure if that's possible with some of this. So we're going to discuss three things in particular, three ailments, you could say, of the mind. And one of them is something that's very interesting to me, is narcissism. Now, I was in a relationship with someone who I believe was not a narcissist, and many people have felt like that. Lots of people see narcissism as the other side of like the other side of the coin to being an empath or empathic, and that they're dancing between each other all of the time. And that some people have like all of one, and some people have all of the other, and most people are a mixture of the two. And my experience was a devastating experience. And at one point, I was told, that by this person that they couldn't feel any emotion for anybody, not even like the people they're supposed to be closest to. And I couldn't mentally unwrap that. I couldn't even understand what that meant. So why shouldn't narcissism absolutely terrify the more empathic amongst us?
Well, that's a great question, and I've got a really strange case that I think fits right with that, and it's about a man named John Sharon, and the only reason I can say these names is because these people have volunteered to have their stories told, and they weren't my patients. They're just heavily written about in the literature out there. And John suffered from what is called Cotard syndrome. It's also called walking corpse syndrome. And so John believed that he was dead. So despite being actually alive and physically healthy, this condition was linked, strangely I would say that, to a disconnection from different brain regions that are aware of the body, of bodily functions. For instance, you may not be aware that you're breathing right now, but if you bring your attention to the breath, you will realize that breathing is occurring, heartbeat is occurring. I've already mentioned respiration. As I sit here, if I pay attention, I can feel a slight, not breeze, but the presence of air on the back of my right hand and my right arm. And if you take time to think, you may be able to become aware of that on your right arm or your left arm or your face. You see, the brain is tracking all of these things in real time, but it sublimates it to different levels of conscious and unconscious experience. But here's the key. As humans, we get better and better and better at this, what is called interoceptive. So I encourage you to enter into your life with interoception. Literally spend time being aware, practicing awareness. What do I notice at the back of my neck? What do I notice on the back of my hand? What is the taste that I recognize in my mouth? And then becoming more aware of ourselves really helps us become more aware of others. And again, it's really like putting these jigsaw puzzle pieces together along with what we're going to talk about in a moment, which I mentioned was psychological solipsism. You've never heard that term before because I made that up. I just thought the words fit together nicely. And solipsism is the belief that you're the only person that exists in your universe. So really, if you pay attention and you compare the jigsaw puzzle analogy I've mentioned, Cotard syndrome or walking corpse syndrome, and then the psychological solipsism, I think it really very well answers Johnny's question. If we think about it, what do we do about people that seem to have what we call narcissism? What's going on with them? Is it about them? Is it about me? Is it something that they can't get over? Johnny, you mentioned that earlier when you talked about, can the brain really be reprogrammed? But I want to go on to one more here that is called Capgras delusion, one of my favorites. I first heard about this in the late 80s during undergraduate school. And this is based on a case study of an unfortunate gentleman named David. And David believed, get this, David believed that his parents were imposters. He believed that some being had imprisoned his parents somewhere. These were not his parents. They looked like his parents, walked like his parents, talked like his parents. Even though he recognized them visually, there was some disconnection between his visual recognition of them and other data that his brain simply wasn't able to access. And so let me take the narcissism thing that you hear so much about on social media. What this is an inability of that person to put all the pieces together such that they're not the only person in their universe, that you, me, Johnny are real people also that have wants and needs and wishes and hurts, habits, and hangups. And so all these pathways that equate to that kind of conclusion that you, that is you, is just like the me that is me and experiences pain and suffering and troubles and trials and tribulations is really a very complex mechanism in the brain. But the good news is that we can use therapeutic approaches that help the person get better and better and better at recognizing the other person as a other person, not just as an it. So it's really deep education, deep into the recesses, the dark recesses. You know, there's no light in the brain, into the dark recesses of the brain itself, helping things connect and communicate in that person's brain like it connects and communicates in your own. When you recognize me as a person, and you recognize that maybe in this situation, I have a need that needs to be addressed before your needs need to be addressed, kind of a mental triage, then that's something that the brain can carry out and get better and better at over time.
That is a brilliant way to put it, but it also leaves me with loads of questions of how you would possibly get a narcissist to understand properly, you know, mentally embedded within that sort of paradigm, how you'd get them to actually go and find help or seek help. And I think that would be one of the main problems, is actually getting them to recognize their own inability to perceive others as being emotional creatures. But going on, psychopathy. Have fictional characters such as Norman Bates given psychopaths a bad rap? And what are the potential benefits to psychopathy?
Well, you know, really psychopaths, once identified as, you know, not all psychopaths are criminals, and of course not all criminals are psychopaths. It's two very, very different things. And so the thing that happens with people diagnosed with it who are also criminals, they kind of become expert lifelong patients. And so in studying them and what they lack gives us better insight into what we have and how we think about the world and how we really humanize people. And one thing I want to point out is all these terms I'm coming up with, I said there's a term I made up. Psychological solipsism. Now, you've heard of psychological. Most people have not heard of solipsism. I've simply put the two words together, kind of a portmanteau phrase. All of these words are made up. The brain really doesn't care what you call it. These processes are really just extremes of normal processes that we all have. I'll give an example. Surgeons, when a surgeon is cutting into a human body and has a trocar or something, spreading ribs apart, cutting through flesh and bone, in order to operate, and I'm not, kind of no pun intended, in order to operate and be effective in that situation, they really do have to call on some of the same shutting down of mental processes that a psychopath does so well at shutting down, because they cannot sit there and look at that as a human body of, say, their son or their daughter and do a good job at it. And it's no, probably no surprise that people that rate highest in psychopathy tend to be who? Surgeons. But also, and this is no surprise also, politicians. Because a politician, let's just take Eisenhower and Truman, how would they make a decision to send millions of men into battle, knowing that they were the sons and daughters of people just like him, and passed down the order to drop a bomb that literally incinerated thousands and thousands of people? So people, to function in certain areas, have to be able to turn on and turn off certain areas. And studying psychopathy helps us understand what those areas are.
There was one more, because we were going to talk about schizophrenia, but we've got literally about 30 seconds, which would make anybody schizophrenic, or any answer schizophrenic. But surely the benefits are slim to being schizophrenic.
Well, I don't know, not so much. I found that people that have schizophrenia come to deal with it like anybody would any kind of thing that impairs functional status. And some people, after many, many years, if asked to give it up, they in fact wouldn't give it up. When they're offered medications that reduce symptoms, they tend not to want the medications. But here's a quick thing on psychological solipsism. As you're listening to me, there's a part of your brain right over here and right over here that is listening to me. And so we can get better and better and better at humanizing people and train our brains to become better listening by stopping and giving space a chance to hear their voice and to hear what they have to say. We're literally reminding ourselves that we're not the only person in the universe, that I have a voice, Johnny has a voice, you have a voice, and we can train our brains to get better at humanizing other people. Thank you so much.
I don't feel different now that I'm older. I don't feel different now. I got my old school coming back. Yeah. I don't feel angry, I'm just bored. Oh yeah. I don't feel different now. I got my old school coming. Tell me what you need, what you want from life, and I won't, oh God alive, I won't judge. Tell me what'll quench your thirst tonight, and I'll make my bar to 10, yeah. Tell me what you need, what you want from life, and I won't, oh God alive, I won't judge. Tell me what'll quench your thirst tonight, and I'll make my bar to 10. I don't feel different, I'm just bolder. I don't feel different now, I got my old school coming back. Yeah, I don't feel angry, I'm just bored of this shit. Oh yeah, I don't feel different now, I got my old school coming. It's coming. Tell me what you need, what you want from life, and I won't.